Creeping horror lurked beyond the door. An unusual story by Paul Suter. You haven't told me yet how it happened, I said to Mrs. Malkin. She set her lips and eyed me sharply. Didn't you talk with the coroner? Yes, of course, I admitted. But as I understand, you found my uncle. I thought. Well, I wouldn't care to say anything about it, she interrupted with decision. This housekeeper of my uncle's was somewhat taller than I, and much heavier, two physical preponderances, which afford any woman possessing them an advantage over the inferior male. She appeared a subject for diplomacy rather than argument. Noting her ample jaw, her breadth of cheek, and the unsentimental glint of her eye, I decided on conciliation. I placed a chair for her, there in my Uncle Godfrey's study, and dropped in another myself. At least, before we go over the other parts of the house, suppose we rest a little, I suggested, in my most unctuous manner. The place rather gets on one's nerves, don't you think so? It was sheer luck. I claim no credit for it. My chance reflection found the weak spot in her fortifications. She replied to it with an undoubted smack of satisfaction. It's more than 7 years that I've been doing for Mr. Sarston, sir. Bringing him his meals regular as clockwork, keeping the house clean as he'd let me, and sleeping at my own home on nights. And in all that time I've said, over and over, there ain't a house in New York the equal of this for queerness. Nor anything else, I encouraged her with a laugh, and her confidences opened another notch. You're likely right in that too, sir. And I've said to poor Mr. Sarston many a time, it's all well enough, says I, to have bugs for a hobby. You can afford it, and being a bachelor and by yourself, you don't have to consider other people's likes and dislikes. And it's all well enough if you want to, says I, to keep thousands and thousands of them in cabinets all over the place, the way you do. But when it comes to pinning them on the walls in regular armies, I says, and on the ceilings of your own study, and even on different parts of the furniture, so that a body don't know what awful thing she's a-going to find under her hand of a sudden, when she does the dusting. Why then, I says to him, it's driving a decent woman too far. And did he ever try to reform his ways when you told him that? I asked, smiling. To be frank with you, Mr. Robinson, when I talked like that to him, he generally raised my pay. And what was a body to do then? I can't see how Lucy Lawson stood the place as long as she did, I observed, watching Mrs. Malkin's red face very closely. She swallowed the bait and leaned forward, hands on knees. Poor girl. It got on her nerves. But she was the quiet kind. You never saw her, sir? I shook my head. One of them slim, faded girls, with light hair, and hardly a word to say for herself. I don't believe she got to know the next-door neighbor the whole year she lived with your uncle. She was an orphan, wasn't she, sir? Yes, I said. Godfrey Sarston and I were her only living relatives. That was why she came from Australia to stay with him, after her father's death. Mrs. Malkin nodded. I was hoping that, by putting a check on my eagerness, I would lead her on to a number of things I greatly desired to know. Up to the time I had induced the housekeeper to show me through this strange house of my Uncle Godfrey's, the whole affair had been a mystery of lips which closed and faces which were averted at my approach. Even the coroner seemed unwilling to tell me just how my uncle had died. "Did you understand she was going to live with him, sir?" asked Mrs. Malkin, looking hard at me. I confined myself to a nod. Well, so did I. Yet, after a year, back she went. "She went suddenly?" I suggested. "So suddenly that I never knew a thing about it till after she was gone. I came to do my chores one day, and she was here. I came the next, and she had started back to Australia. That's how sudden she went." "They must have had a falling out," I conjectured. "I suppose it was because of the house." "Maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't." "You know of other reasons?" "I have eyes in my head," she said. "But I am not going to talk about it. Shall we be getting on now, sir?" I tried another lead. "I hadn't seen my uncle in 5 years, you know. He seemed terribly changed. He was not an old man, by any means. Yet when I saw him at the funeral..." I paused, expectantly. To my relief, she responded readily. "He looked that way for the last few months, especially the last week. And I spoke to him about it 2 days before it happened, sir, and told him he'd do well to see the doctor again. But he cut me off short. My sister took sick the same day, and I was called out of town. Next time I saw him, he was..." She paused, and then went on, sobbing. "To think of him lying there, in that awful place, and calling for me, as I know he must, and me not around to hear him." As she stopped again, suddenly, and threw a suspicious glance at me, I hastened to insert a matter-of-fact question. "Did he appear ill on that last day?" "Not so much ill as..." "Yes?" I prompted. She was silent for a long time, while I waited, afraid that some word of mine had brought back her former attitude of hostility. Then she seemed to make up her mind. "I oughtn't to say another word. I've said too much already. But you've been liberal with me, sir, and I know something you've a right to be told, which I'm thinking no one else is going to tell you. Look at the bottom of his study door a minute, sir." I followed her direction. What I saw led me to drop to my hands and knees, the better to examine it. "Why would he put a rubber strip on the bottom of his door?" I asked, getting up. She replied, with another enigmatic suggestion. "Look at these, if you will, sir. You'll remember that he slept in his study. That was his bed, over there, in the alcove." "Bolts?" I exclaimed, and I reinforced sight with touch by shooting one of them back and forth a few times. Double bolts on the inside of his bedroom door. An upstairs room at that. What was the idea? Mrs. Malkin portentously shook her head and sighed, as one unburdening her mind. "Only this I can say, sir. He was afraid of something. Terribly afraid, sir. Something that came in the night." "What was it?" I demanded. "I don't know, sir. It was in the night that it happened?" I asked. She nodded. Then, as if the prologue were over, as if she had prepared my mind sufficiently, she produced something from under her apron. She must have been holding it there all the time. "It's his diary, sir. It was lying here on the floor. I saved it for you, before the police could get their hands on it." I opened the little book. One of the sheets near the back was crumpled. and I glanced at it idly. What I read there impelled me to slap the cover shut again. "Did you read this?" I demanded. She met my gaze frankly. "I looked into it, sir, just as you did. Only just looked into it. Not for worlds would I do even that again. I noticed some reference here to a slab in the cellar. What slab is that?" "It covers an old, dried-up well, sir." "Will you show it to me?" "You can find it for yourself, sir. I'm not going down there," she said decidedly. "Ah, well, I've seen enough for today," I told her. "I'll take the diary back to my hotel and read it."